excited to be here upon this, panel, and I appreciate NC Innovation and NC Idea for the invitation.
Leah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leah Townsend. I'm an accidental founder turned founder in residence at CED. Like Charles, I have a PhD in neuroscience. And after graduation, I realized I don't ever want to pipette anything ever again. So I went into management consulting, loved it, but did not like the work life balance because it's non existent. And so I accidentally was kind of an entrepreneur in residence at Carolina before they had such a thing. I went to their tech transfer office. I said, hey, do any of your faculty startups need any help? I don't want any compensation. I just want to recalibrate from working with like the Pfizers of the world to working with smaller companies and organizations and those challenges. And I ran my own search process, ended up volunteering with 4 faculty startups. Didn't think it was going to go anywhere. And again, my goal was not to have a job and not to found a company. Absolutely not. And then I helped one of them get a $1 million phase 1 SBIR. And he said, well, Leah, you should come run my company. And I said, well, we have a problem. I know nothing about startups and I know nothing about medical device. Are you sure? And he said, yes. So that was the start of my journey. So we got it out of his garage, out of UNC Chapel Hill in his lab, sold it. And then I stayed on with the acquiring company for a number of years, recently separated. And I said, okay, end of my first startup journey, what I want to do next, I want to give back. And so for me, CED was really critical at certain moments in my startup journey. So I'm honored now to be giving back to other founders as a founder in residence at CED and happy to dive into what we do. So thank you for the invitation.
All right, Jay.
My name is Jay Mixter. I'm a semi-reformed entrepreneur. I had the pleasure of spending 30 years in Boston, founding or helping lead a number of different startups. So startups kind of got into my blood. I'm a startup junkie, and I ended up during a lot of that time, particularly in between, and then in the later stages when I was teaching entrepreneurship and innovation courses, working with a bunch of different accelerators, university programs, entrepreneurship centers. And so imagine my shock moving from Boston down to Asheville 3 years ago and discovering that we didn't have the same kind of ecosystem there. We didn't have the same kind of white-collar employers. We didn't have the R1 universities, all those things that tend to drive and support innovation. So we're trying to employ some different models down there, which we can talk a little bit more about. But I've been involved with EIR programs, typically out of university centers before, more residential kinds of programs. Now we're actually trying to take our program out to the universities and the colleges in different parts of Western North Carolina to basically share the wealth and bring them some resources they wouldn't otherwise have.
Thank you all. I want to start first by just baselining what we mean by an entrepreneur in residence. This room, of course, is very familiar with mentoring and advising, like those kinds of mechanisms for startup support. EIRs and EIR models can be deployed in a number of ways, and I know you all have seen lots of different models, but let's first just start with like that EIR role. Like, what is an EIR? What is it not? Are there misconceptions around the role? How is it different or similar to kind of a mentor and advisor? Yeah, anyone want to start with your definition, Charlie?
I think to me, so I've been a part of the NC Innovation EIR since their pilot, and then now again with their, I guess, full first year. I don't know what you want to call it. And so to me, it's a problem solver, through and through, a problem solver that's trying to translate innovation into traction. So that's my sort of plain and simple definition, but maybe the other panelists might want to add.
So for our program, we're all exited founders in different industries. Variety of skill sets. I think the CED team does a really good job making sure there's good coverage for pretty much anything that could walk in the door for CED. And so I think for me, what separates us from another advisor or a mentor is that we're another business operator sitting down on the same side of the table as the person that we're helping. I'll give you a concrete example. One of my companies, I'm working with them on an acquisition negotiations. And he said to me, he's like, thank God I have you, because you don't have a dog in this fight other than wanting me to be successful. I don't need to worry about your angle, so he can spitball, how to reply to that email or whatever, without worrying about what my angle is on it, right? And I'm a peer who's been there before in that seat, and I can just sit beside him on that side of the table. And so for me, I think that's a little bit different than other advisors or mentors that you might find in the ecosystem.
That's great. And Jay, I know you're deploying an EIR model that is creative, and I think maybe thinking about this a little bit differently.
Yeah,
So
it is different. I mean, I like Charles's description of trying to help translate to traction. And so tapping into the potential is a big piece of it. But we're working with a wide range of entrepreneurs at different stages. We're not in the classic tech transfer, let's figure out how we can make this happen. One of the other roles that I've seen or been involved in has been sort of working to find out who's working on something interesting and making those community connections with people either elsewhere within a university, within another program, or within the community so that you can get to that traction. We're being a bit more permissive right now in how we put it in place in Western North Carolina, because we are trying to take it out to people who don't have the center, who don't have deep entrepreneurship programs, and give them the ability to have somebody come in and encourage them, work with the entrepreneurs who often don't know what they don't know, to help them understand what it may actually take, to help debug the ideas that they're working on. So it's some of the blocking and tackling that you might get into in a mentoring role, but it's still with the idea that we actually want to foster more businesses that succeed. And if they don't succeed, we at least want to foster that experience and the education that comes from that. A lot of us have the scars to prove it, and that's what makes us better entrepreneurs.
great. And I'll pile on a little bit here. I think the distinction for me is that mentors and advisors certainly can be instrumental, but have a little bit more of like a fly in, fly out, mentality. EIRs, I think, are distinguished because they are embedded, whether at an institution or at with a startup team. And I think, having folks that have that operational experience that can be embedded and actually, as Leah said, like sit on the same side of the table and actually, roll their sleeves up and get their hands dirty when it calls for it. I think that's where EIRs can be extremely powerful. So let's maybe dig in a little bit more. I want to first focus on the EIR startup relationship. And I think particularly for Charlie and Leah, what has your experience been in how do you establish that relationship well up front and set the right expectations on both sides, and start that collaboration with the right kind of end goals in mind and the right practices so that things get started off on the right foot? What would you add?
Sure, I can kick it off. I think for me, I want to be upfront that I'm not there to run their business for them, right? I'm there as a support, kind of, a peer, right? That in a confidential way, again, I don't have a dog in the fight. I'm there to help them execute against the challenges that they're facing. And it can be like a one-off consultation, right? Like, you're having a tricky situation with a board, right? Like, how do you handle that board meeting? How do you prepare? And okay, they're successful. That's great. They don't need me anymore. Or it can be kind of in the trenches. Hey, there's an ongoing situation that we need to troubleshoot. And, I'm jumping in the trenches with them. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to make the ultimate decisions for the business. And so I like to be very upfront about that, right? Because I'm not in there to take over. I'm there to support. I'm there to sit beside them, and help them move the company forward. But I'm not, going to make the go, no go call at the end of the day.
Yeah, I completely agree with what she just said. I view it as, like during the networking section, how you make a friend, how you introduce yourself. It's no different when you're trying to engage on this EIR side, and read the room. Be cognizant of, what the reaction is, and to sort of take it slow, if you will. And then dive in the trenches if need be, if there's a significant issue, or back away. But certainly to piggyback on what Rachel said, being an EIR is to roll up your sleeves, be willing to do what you need to do to get things done. And I think that that's something that all of us up here on the panel are always willing to do, and bring our talents to that table, no matter what the objective is.
Yeah, I think, being a consultant means you're not really part of the team. And so if your mindset is more, operational, you've been in the trenches, you've got the stories and the scars to prove it. I think that actually brings a lot of credibility. And so when you're thinking about who should be an EIR, I think a lot of it has to do with their adaptability and bandwidth to sort of understand and contribute. But on the other side of the fence, there is that notion that not everybody is coachable. And not everybody wants to sort of listen. And I think there's just like with mentoring, there is that balance that you want to look for between somebody who's got great ideas and vision and confidence, but somebody who's willing to listen and try on new ideas and really listen, right? But own the outcome. And I think that's what makes a good relationship between whether it's a mentee and a mentor, or it's an EIR and the companies you're trying to help. But bringing that operational mindset is really helpful.
Yeah, you said something interesting when we were chatting earlier that at times you feel like as an EIR yourself that you could do more for the companies, but they don't ask for it or they don't know exactly how to engage. So how do you mitigate that? Yeah, again, I think it's about how do you set up the relationship so that the startup founder also understands like how to really leverage the resource.
Yeah, great question. So when we were chatting, it was, are there any kind of lessons learned, things that you can, give founders so they get the most out of working with an EIR? And I shared that, I think for some folks, they do leave a lot of value on the table. I think for me, as I've kind of leaned into the role and gotten better at being an entrepreneur in residence, it's about asking them the right questions, right? Um, you know, so, let's say they understand their beachhead market. That's great. How do you know that's your beachhead market, right? I'm not gonna say they've picked the wrong one, but help me understand, right? And then, oh, because their neighbor thinks that that's a great idea, right? And they actually haven't really pressure tested and validated that as the beachhead market. Hey, maybe this is an area we can explore together, right? So it's just kind of being very thoughtful about probing to make sure that they realize the full extent of what I can offer them, because oftentimes they don't know what it is that they don't know, and they don't know what it is that they maybe need, especially if they're a first-time founder. So kind of helping them think through, how could you use this person versus second, third-time founders. I mean, they're on it, right? They have like a laundry list of things they want to work with me. They're not leaving any value on the table because they're like, this is an amazing resource. You've done this, you've done this, you've done this. Great. Let's tackle all of it, right? And so I think especially if you're working with a first-time founder, it's making sure they understand the actual value that a program like this can offer.
I like how you framed it where you said like, the founder can just ask me and I'll tell them when to back off, like just ask and you'll dig in, you're willing to.
Can I pile on that with one thing? I think asking good questions is worth more than providing good answers. When you think about the role that they're playing and the need to build trust and to own what comes out of it, I think about the right questions first.
And it's to avoid the dependency as well. So, as we've all noted, yes, we could provide the answer, but if we can steer you to come up with the answer yourself, then you avoid that dependency long term. And you're sort of autonomous with how to go about building the business or making business decisions. And that's sort of my approach as well.
Great. Let's talk about the challenge of doing the matching between startups and EIRs. We see this all the time in mentorship. Riot tries to take a very hands-on approach and highly tailor our mentor matches. That's one thing, but when you're trying to provide an EIR resource that can go to that kind of like next level of operating and rolling their sleeves up. What makes a good match and in your experiences, How is the evaluation to make those matches successful or not?
You know, I think the role of an EIR can be defined in different ways. And one has to do with content and helping nurture what they're trying to do. But another is helping, again, going back to asking the right questions. And you don't necessarily have to be deep in their industry to know the right questions to ask. And another is helping them make connections and seeing what could be and helping them see that. So there are going to be times when it's as important that you have a match like a good mentor-mentee relationship. And there are other times when I think, that's not necessarily as important, depending on what the expectations are. And I've seen that in school programs where you've got an entrepreneurship center that brings in an entrepreneur in residence, and they have a particular bag of tricks, right? They have a certain set of skills and experiences, and that lends itself really well to some of your technical departments and not so well to others maybe, and vice versa. And so I think you have to take that into account.
Yeah, and I guess when I think about matching, right? That was your question. Yeah, I have such broad interest that I get interested in any of the technology, the science, the this, the that. So that can almost be normalized for me because I will get interested if you talk to me. But it comes down to me to an assessment of the team and the team's ability to not only execute, which can be pushed, if you will, uh, but the appetite. Is the appetite there? That's sort of fundamental to being, I think, successful as an entrepreneur. I think Andrew talked about having taught his kids or teaching kids entrepreneurship to survive, and that's an absolute requirement these days. It's something I do with my kids on a print-on-demand T-shirt shop. Basic, I know, but it teaches them that appetite. And so if they carry that forward, I think it could be a match towards an EIR type opportunity in the future. But that's sort of fundamental to me is that appetite.
I'm like Charlie in many regards, where I can get interested into pretty much anything. My most recent company that I was working with was an AI toxicology company. Do I know anything about toxicology? No. Do I know a lot about AI? Not incredibly much. But I was fascinated. I was like, okay, this is amazing. What it did for me, just like Charlie mentioned, was the founder's passion. And every time I gave her feedback, she would listen, she would integrate it, she would execute, and she'd come back. Okay, what's next? How do we think about the next thing, right? And so it's that fire and passion and drive. That's what I think makes a great match, more so than subject matter expertise. I'm very upfront about what I know and what I don't know in terms of subject matter, and will quickly exceed the bounds of the things that I know, but we can bring people in for that. But in terms of how you build a business, right? I mean, that's kind of fundamental. So I think it's more, to Charlie's point, it's that passion. And does this person really have that entrepreneurial spirit? And if so, I'm going to go to bat for them and try to move mountains and try to help them move mountains. If they don't have it, then it's kind of, I'm feeling like this is not a good use of my time.
Yeah, to that point, I think business comes down to first principles, right? So every business, no matter what kind of business you are, you could be in AI, you could be in life sciences, you've got to solve a problem, you've got to drive more revenue than you incur costs, you've got to be able to reach your customers, and you've got to do things within the regulatory landscape. So have a legal business is what we're talking about today. So yeah, I think, whether you're an EIR or a mentor advisor, I think oftentimes that role is kind of just in helping founders to focus on those first principles and ask the right questions and so on. And then I think it's, of course, even better if the person in the kind of advisory role has the operator experience and has been there, done that, and can kind of usher the startup through something they may be doing for the first time. We will probably have a few minutes to open up for questions. So if you are curious about, EIR roles or models and how you might deploy that. Hold them for one moment, but we'll get to you. I want to first, Jay, give you kind of the opportunity to talk about, like, you are currently building an EIR model, a new program from the ground up in Western North Carolina. So how are you thinking about EIRs as a mechanism for kind of regional economic development and yeah, kind of give us your spin on things right now and what you're taking from other EIR models you've seen maybe outside of North Carolina, and then, you know, what are the unique challenges that you're working through right now?
Can I ask you questions rather than give you answers? So it's an experimental program. We're trying to figure out how do you take, I mean, we're rich in mentors and intellectual capital in Western North Carolina, particularly around Asheville. It's been great. And so how do we export some of that capability? How do we develop a program that we can take out to the schools that don't have those programs? So it's a startup, and we're figuring that out. And I think what the early learning is that it's working differently at different schools. It depends on how engaged they are. It depends on who the champions are internally and how we can fit into either curricular activity or what's going on with the SBC and who their clients are. So there's not one answer. I guess I'd almost have to say stay tuned. But like any good startup, you've got to run some experiments and be adaptable and follow what works.
Fantastic. All right. Well, yeah, let's take audience questions. I was already seeing some hands pop up. So got one right here. Sarah up front.
A question I have is, even in your EIR models, what have you guys seen as the biggest barriers that you have to overcome in doing every? Because you got, seemingly it's three different models that's there that we have here. So what, if you could explain maybe some of the biggest barriers you have to see implementing this?
There's probably too many that we're all rifling through. No.
I mean, barrier number one is getting some funding. Number two is probably defining what kind of EIR and EIR model would work. And then number three is actually putting it to work. You know, how do you do that? How are you within your infrastructure either matching people up or getting people to self-identify and come out of the woodwork?
And then I think that there's some other nuances when it comes to, you know, post matching, let's say, or if you've got a model already identified, maybe it's the economic kind of model, which I believe NCI kind of follows. And you know, once say awards are given, distributed, how is that then handled, right? You know, it's in their case the model. The money goes to that university and it's managed by the procurement office. There is red tape bureaucracy that goes on behind that, and can be somewhat frustrating for somebody trying to execute and commercialize. But it's a mechanism that, for the most part, works. And I think beyond that, you know, hiring can be a problem. When you know that you've got money sitting there to try to you know, bring in, whether it be a postdoc, technician, actual employee, if the company's already started, and maybe has sales already, but now you're subject to the university system hiring freeze, right? So your hands can get tied. So I think, you know, models are always being optimized. And I think it goes back to Jay's response is experiment and see how change can happen after the fact.
Form should follow function. So I think no matter, you know, if you're establishing a new EIR relationship or a new EIR model, thinking about what is the ultimate outcome that you want to get to and how do you design the program, design the relationship to fit that outcome. We've got a few minutes left. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you speak to the accessibility from a founder's perspective as far as what should we as founders look for in different organizations on, who is the most capable for either our technology or our market? Is it a kind of a catch-all where you all do the same thing but do it a different way? Is there a pre-revenue, post-revenue issue at hand? Can you be too small and too big? Can you kind of speak to limitations from a company's perspective on when it's too late to join or too soon that we could take advantage?
I can take this one to start. So the Founder in Residence program is available to all members of CED. So simply join CED and you have access to us. We do have kind of a stable of entrepreneurs in residence who have different areas of expertise, different industry knowledge, different connections. So we meet once a week to review requests that have come in from member companies, and we triage it and we say, okay, who has which expertise, who's the most relevant to help this founder, and who has the bandwidth. And we do try to be very intentional and thoughtful about matching that individual with what they need when they need it. I've helped everyone from someone who's still in the lab at NC State think about how to spin out a company to someone who's, have FDA approval, they have commercial traction, and they're negotiating acquisition with two interested parties, right? So there's not too early and not too late, at least as far as CED is concerned, and there's not really any one industry focus, at least in our organization.
And just to piggyback on that, while I'm not affiliated with an organization that matches and et cetera, I'm independent with my own consultancy. I take the same approach, really. Again, that foundation of being interested in all kinds of science, all kinds of technology. If I don't know it, hopefully I know somebody that does, and then I leverage my network that way. But in terms of pushing things forward, whether it's a new venture or whether it's an established company, that doesn't matter. I think a lot of more established mid-sized companies will take on the idea of sort of startup mentality, and will look for people who can help spearhead that maybe new concept. Maybe they've written an SBIR. Maybe they've done something to explore something new within their already established business. And I look for those kind of opportunities as well.
I would say too, if you're a founder that's considering what support organizations to engage with, talk to other founders who have been through their programs or have engaged in their resources. They'll certainly tell you kind of what they got out of it. So highly recommend that. We can maybe do one more question if there is one. Oh yeah, ramen. All right.
So thank you for presenting here and for providing all the information. So one of the challenges we have is IP. How much of the involvement you have with the IP with your projects?
For me, I guess considerable, and I guess that sort of relates to my background, and so I helped co-found a intellectual property, technology, fintech kind of solution on the renewal side of IP, but that meant I needed to deep dive into all things IP. But that said, my involvement in other companies, I've learned that landscape. So even within the EIR roles through NCI, I serve as the IP consultant for at least one of the projects. And then I serve that for my independent clients as well. But I know my limitations. So then I have my network that I reach out to for additional IP consulting if needed.
I mean, I assume that I don't own any IP, so I'm going to take the question a slightly different way. So I'm assuming all IP stays with the company. We have non-disclosure agreements, confidentiality agreements, and so I will advise on kind of strength of IP and kind of try to ask questions and connect with resources, but I'm certainly not doing any IP generating activities. And, you know, if I'm helping to put together some marketing materials or something, I'm assuming all of that goes to the company. And not all of our companies are IP heavy. Some of them are, you know, more, you know, software as a service. It's a little bit more in the secret sauce. And so creating an environment where that entrepreneur is comfortable sharing some of those key details so I can give them the best advice possible and they're not worried about me taking any idea that I might hear in a meeting with them.
Just a quick postscript. Some of the universities I was dealing with in Boston, it was a mandate that, you know, you're getting paid by the technology transfer office, and so everything was driven by IP. And in other universities, it was much more about how do we help people succeed as entrepreneurs for businesses that are deserving.
Great. The clock has run down on us, so any one of us are happy to talk further. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you guys for having us, and we'll cede the stage.